Dear students, in this tutorial we'll discuss the last chapter of Module 5 Database Programming. So first we'll discuss what is a database. Database is a file where we are organizing the data. How we are organizing the data, it's similar to a dictionary. It's also a key value pair. What is the difference between the database and the dictionary? The major difference between the database and the dictionary, the database is stored on a disk where it is in permanent storage. So even after the program, it persists because the database is stored permanently on the storage. It can store for more data than a dictionary. And what is this limited size of the database? Can we store any amount of data? Definitely not. The amount of data what we can store is limited based on the memory of the computer. So just like a dictionary, database software is designed to keep the inserting and accessing the data very fast. Dictionary, for a small amount of data, it can be work faster. Here in the database, even if it is a large amount of data, accessing will be fast. Database software maintains its performance by building the indexes. So whenever it's a huge amount of data, we keep on inserting the data into the database. But when a large amount of data has been entering into the database, how it can able to access faster? It maintains the indexes. So based on that index, it's easy to fetch the data in a less amount of time. So, and we can able to retrieve the data which is interested by the user. There are different types of database systems. What are the different types of database systems? In your previous semester also you have learned database and very brief details about other databases as well. So we'll just have a quick glance on this. There are many different database systems. The wide variety of databases which has been used are Oracle, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, PostgreSQLite, and SQLite. So in this chapter or in this course, we'll be discussing with this SQLite database. So the reason why we are using this, because already the SQLite database is being built inside the Python. So it's already been embedded. So we just need to use this. If you have already installed on Python in your system, you need not to download anything. Directly we can make use of or we can able to build the database programs used on this SQLite. So we focus, that's what we discussed. So if you are using a Firefox browser or this SQLite database internally available in many products. It's need not to be only this. It's there in so many products. So if you want to use this SQLite, you can download this, or else if you have already installed a Python, directly we can able to use this Python. So SQLite database browser. Here we focus on using Python to work with data in SQLite database files. So but still many operations can be done more conveniently using software called the database browser for SQLite, which can be freely downloaded in this. So using this browser, you can easily create tables, insert, delete, or edit the contents, or you can simply run the SQL queries the way how you learn to work with an SQL database. So you similar to that on this SQLite database on the Python, you can able to work with all these things. So database browser for SQLite is similar to the text editor. Suppose you already know how you work with the text. You open a file and then we can able to write the contents into the file. When we are working with a small amount of changes, So we just go with this, just like a text editor, you open a file and edit the text only when there is a small changes. If you want to make more changes, you want to update the tables, then you need to go with the Python program and edit the contents. That's what we'll find the same pattern when working with the databases. If you are working with the Python, it's similar to that. You'll do a simple operations on the database browser, and more complex, yes, you go with the Python programs. Creating a database table. Database requires more defined structure than the Python list or a dictionary. So even though if you compare, database is similar to the dictionary where you have a key value pair and you're going to access the data based on the indexes, but it is more structured than this list and dictionaries. While creating a database table, we must tell in advance the columns, the names of columns and the type of the values we are going to place in each of the columns. So when the database software knows what is the type of the data which we are going to store in each column, it can choose the most efficient way to store and in order to look up the data based on the type of the data. So we can look at the various data types supported by SQLite at the following URL. So if you use this, you will come to know what and all the applications or the things where it's supported by the SQLite. So here is an example of a code to create a database file and a table. So the name of the table is a tracks. We are creating two columns in the database. We already know when we are creating the table, the name of the column and the type of value which we are going to give it into the column is mandate, and it has to be created before we insert the values, right? So in order to use this SQLite, we need to import SQLite 3. Then we need to do the connection. So in the further slides, we'll be learning what are these, how it's been done in detail. Just glance through the things. So connection, SQLite.connect with this music.SQLite, and then you're going to create the cursor, the short cur. You're creating this cursor. Then we are using the invoking the method cursor. Then execute that cursor. So we are dropping the table if exists. This name of the table is the tracks, and then we are creating the table tracks. And while creating the table, we're supposed to give the columns. We are creating two columns here. The name of the column is the title, and the value we are going to place in that column is text. The name of the column is, second column is place, and the value is integer. And we close this. So we created two columns for the table. This is the title of the columns, and these are the types of the values which can be able to place in those columns. So we'll discuss in detail what are these things we have written. So SQLite 3.connect. What this does here? The connect operation makes a connection to the database stored in the file music.sqlite in the current directory. If the file does not exist, it creates a file, just like how we create a file in the write mode. Similar to that, if it is already there, it connects to this. If it is not existing, it creates a new file with the name, whatever we specify here. So here we are creating music.sqlite. The reason why we need to keep the invoke a method connect here, because we are going to connect to the database. Suppose if we are creating if you are working in a local server and the database in some other server, we need to establish a connection between the things. That is the reason we need to invoke the method connect. If you are working in the same, you can just do with the local, but here for the simple example, we are working with the local directory and we are going to create a database in the local directory only. And the next command or the instruction is we need to create the cursor. This connect dot cursor the cursor is like a file. This is just like a file. To handle the file, how we are going to make it? So it's just like an open up file. This cursor, calling the cursor is very similar to an opening a file in order to deal with the text files. Once we have a cursor, we can begin to execute commands on the contents of the database using this execute method. So we create, and the open handler, file handler is stored in this. Using this, we can able to execute the file. So this is what the database cursor, the overall look, how it looks. Execute, fetch all, close, and this is your program. So this is the main one, the cursor, in order to interact with the database. So cursor.execute. Drop table if exist. Tracks. The name of the table what we have given is tracks. The reason why we are dropping the table before we create, because once we write the code, we may keep executing the code multiple times. So in order to avoid the error, because of the table is already exist, so when we try to create the next time the same table, it throws an error. In order to avoid that, we are dropping the table if it's already there, and then we'll continue with creating a table. That is the only reason why we use this instruction here, drop table. It just deletes the table here. With this drop table, it deletes the table so that no table is available. Now if you try to create a table with the name, without any error, we can able to successfully create the table. So we are executing the command create table. Tracks, name of the table is tracks, and the parameters which we already discussed is what is this title and text, place and integer. We know this title and the place are the name of the columns. Text is the type of the value we can provide for this title. For the place, we can provide an integer value. Okay, once we create this, how we can able to insert a value into the columns? So if you want to insert a value, we need to use an insert operation, and use this SQL insert command indicates which table we are using, and then defines a new row by listing the fields we want to include. So these are the two fields we need to do it, title and place. For these two fields, we need to add the values. So it has to be followed with the values which we need to be placed. And when we are specifying the values, we are going to specify that as in 2 question marks to indicate that the actual values are passed in as a tuple. These are the two things. We are going to pass the values as a tuple in order to indicate that we are going to specify it as a 2 question marks, and then later we are going to provide that values which we need to be passed as a second parameter, and we execute. So here is an example where it includes the values into the table which we are creating. So inserting into the table. So we already create this table. We know what are all these instructions are. So till this we were executed in the previous. So sorry, this is just directly adding the values into the things. So we already created a table and we created the columns. Now we are directly adding the values into the things. So insert into this tracks. These are the two columns which we need to add. So values, we are going to provide these tuples. So later we are providing this next parameter, what is this tuple is. So similarly, we added two values into the each columns, and then commit. So print the table, and we are executing this select title place from tracks. So we are just printing all this. So once we execute these things, we'll understand better. So we'll execute it first. We've already discussed how to create the database, how to create the table. So now we are just adding the values into the table which we have already created. So these are the first row values, and the second row value we are adding, extracting the values row by row, and then we are printing it. So we'll just execute this. So this is what the output we get. These are the values inside the table. So with this, I'm winding up the session. Thank you for learning.